Thanks so much for watching our show. We really appreciate the support. It costs a lot to produce, so we're asking for donations and pledges here on Patreon. Thanks again. Welcome to See It and Feel It with Dr. Brett. And I'm Dr. Brett, and today I'm here with Christian Straka, a mental game coach, a peak performance coach, an entrepreneur, and a former tennis pro. Christian, how are you?
I'm very good. Thank you very, very much for having me.
Tell us about, I know it was a while ago, but tell us about the pro circuit and what your experience was like back then. And then, tell us how much it's changed, and then we'll get into all the mental game stuff.
I mean, the pro circuit is kind of on a continuum like any other sport. So the game is changing over the years. The technology is changing, not just in terms of the material that you're using as a player, but also the technology that, now you have this Hawkeye system, so you don't need linesmen anymore. In like the very big tournaments. So like that's a really big change, actually. Because there's no wrong calls anymore. That was kind of a part of the game,
Wow.
Before.
Yeah, totally.
Then in some tournaments, you're allowed to coach. Like back in the day, there was never allowed to coach during matches, Yeah. And then, of course, the science is advancing so much that you can train much smarter. So it's much more frequent that athletes like Federer and Nadal can play into their 40s, even though they're going all out all the time. And 20 years ago, if you were playing still when you were 30, you were kind of considered one of the older players. So
yeah, I remember Andre Agassi at 35, 36, or whenever he retired. He was his body was just destroyed. Yeah. So how long did you play for, and tell us about your experience as a player and then how you evolved into a coach and an entrepreneur?
Well, tennis was my whole life. I started when I was very little, like 4 years old, just like playing a little bit. And then you advance when you're talented and you enjoy and put in the time and work. So like any athlete in any sport, if they advance, it's generally speaking from like a young age. And then I was on like the junior pro circuit. That's kind of what you do in tennis when you're like 12. It's the European circuit, and when you turn 16, you go into like the global circuit. And I was doing pretty well there. And then played at the Australian Open with Federer. We got to the semis and doubles, and then I went onto the pro circuit when I was 18. But pretty soon after that, just like I think maybe 12 months later, I started having problems with my arm. And then every time I was playing, the better I was playing, the more matches I had. But the more matches I had, the more my arm would hurt. So it was like a kind of an issue, right?
Yeah, they call that a catch-22. Yeah, totally.
Exactly. And just like lose first round, then my arm would not bother me that much yet. But if I kind of broke through, then my body kind of stopped me.
Yeah.
So after a lot of tests that resulted in me having a surgery where they removed my first rib at the right side.
Wow.
But that didn't help tennis. So after surgery and after rehab, I had to stop playing anyway. So that was in my early 20s. I was like 21, 22, I kind of stopped.
Wow.
And then my mentor, my coach, Klaus Hofses, who is one of the most successful tennis coaches who has ever lived, he said he thought I might have a good kind of touch for coaching. So I was like, because I was considering going back to college, or like I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I did tennis my whole life.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I'm gonna try. And I did like the whole certification process and this and that, but I really learned to coach from him because I was I was living in Spain at the time, and he was teaching me to teach 4 to 6 hours every day for 6 years. So it's a very rare kind of opportunity to get. Normally, if you become a teacher, you get a certification. It takes a few weekends. It takes 2 years maybe, but like you do most of it by yourself. You got to figure it out. It's more theoretical.
Right.
And for me, this part was like on the back burner. I did it kind of to have it on paper, but the real like skill of coaching and the experience I got from him. And that is like, something you can't pay for.
Yeah, no, totally. It sounds like you had thousands of hours as opposed to other people, and not just any kind of hours, but mentored by one of the best ever. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Wow, very cool. And so tell us about, how you evolved as a coach here. What's different from you, 500 hours in to, 20,000 hours in or whatever you are?
Yeah. That's I don't know how to compress that answer, but generally,
well, we got a little bit of time here, so you don't have to compress it too much. We're not doing sound bites yet.
Yeah. I mean, early on, I would say one of the kind of gifts that I have been given that I didn't have to work for was I'm good with people. I can, kind of tune into them. We have a good relationship. It's fun. It's energetic. So to motivate other athletes on any level, kind of that is just something that I can do without having had to learn that. Excellent. So as a coach, that's kind of a good gift to have, right?
We share that in common. I agree with you. It is kind of a gift.
So, exactly. So what I was developing early on was the methodology. How do you teach and what comes in what order, whether that is physical or whether that is strategical or whether that is mental, like what do you have to pay more attention to? So that was a long process, and of course much shorter process for me than for a lot of other coaches because of my mentor, Klaus, who was kind of showing like, no, you can't like explain this to him, you have got to explain that to him first, or her or them. So that took years to kind of refine. And to be honest, 20 years in, like it is still happening.
Yeah, totally.
But it is like now I'm at a point where I know that, okay, those are the guiding principles of like, you can't teach this before that. Okay.
Right.
But within these principles, there has to be this leeway where one person is kind of better at learning this foundational principle than another person. And then you kind of take different routes. And to the big difference between me coaching now and 20 years ago is that is kind of an effortless flow. I like look at somebody, we work together, whether it's mental performance coaching or tennis or whatever else we're doing.
Right.
And I kind of can go with what they're doing. There's like a big concept. Okay, this is our long-term goal. This is a midterm goal, what you should accomplish within a few months, let's say. And now within that, I really take it kind of moment by moment. I never go into a lesson with somebody and go like, this is what we're going to do. I might have a general idea, but I totally go with where the other person's at. And then tailor the session towards their needs. How, maybe we push it much harder today, or maybe we can really easy. We can work on something quite advanced, or we have to go back to basics. And like being able to move freely in these parameters with somebody in a way that is most beneficial to the athlete, that is something that like I didn't have at the beginning. It was more like, this is what we're doing. And like, if it didn't work, it was hard to kind of adjust to, really turn the session into something where they benefit as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think that's really well said, Christian. It's something obviously I can relate to as well. I'm 30, 40,000 hours in, 25 years or so, whatever it is. And so I'm in the moment wherever I am, right, as I approach a new person or a new situation, or it doesn't matter, session to session experiences. And it sounds like you're doing something similar. You've developed a high level of adaptability and flexibility on your end of the equation.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've never thought about how many hours I've actually coached, but
it's a lot. You
Yeah,
know, I can
exactly.
feel it.
I
I'm
know
a feeler.
do like around 50 hours a week. So if you go
Yeah, and if you do 50 weeks a year, that's 2,500 hours times
exactly.
20 years, that's 50,000, right? So
Okay,
look, you're,
we got it.
yeah, you're probably 40, 50,000 hours in as well,
Yeah,
right? So yeah,
exactly,
so that
exactly.
what happens is, right, and it's pretty obvious, right? You're also one of these people that are committed to a life of learning, right? So you're not just doing hours, you're constantly tweaking your game on your end of the equation, correct?
Yes, very much. I mean, I'd read and exchange as much information and spend time with people that have a lot of knowledge that I don't have. A
Yeah.
lot of them scientists. So I'm very, on my team and mind size in my company, we have 2 neuroscientists. There is a neurobiologist at the University of Stanford who is amazing. His name's Andrew Huberman. So we're in exchange, and I learned from him. He has a podcast which is also mind blowing. Like it's basically like you're doing a mini degree when you're just listening to his podcast. And I read a significant amount. That's on the theoretical side, and then on the practical side, I keep practicing the same. Whether it's my own practice, but the actual coaching aspect is also a practice, really. I just really yesterday, 2 times it happened that I was explaining something to my clients that I have never said before, ever in 20 years, nor have I ever heard it. And it's
Wow, that's pretty
just,
cool. Yeah,
and
no,
those things
definitely.
kind of, after 50,000 hours or whatever it has been, kind of happens. It's like you
Yeah.
can start, or at least I can start now. Sometimes I kind of see things and can explain the same thing that I have explained, 1,000 or 10,000 times now from a completely different angle, but it's still the same thing.
Yeah, no, wonderful. And I think that's really well said as well, Christian. What kind of situations trip you up? I mean, I would imagine not many, but occasionally, we all get tripped up at times, So I'm just curious, do you ever still get tripped up? And if so, have you seen a pattern there?
Yeah, for sure. What triggers me is if somebody kind of wants to work with me, but doesn't want to work.
Right.
Then I notice like that. I have a reaction to that. It doesn't really result in that's not in a conflict, try to generally, if that happens, which really is very rare because if somebody comes to
Most
you
people are
and they
highly
pay money
motivated.
for
Yeah, totally.
your advice and your
Right.
coaching, whatever you're doing, it's very rare that somebody will just be unwilling to take in your input. It's kind of,
Totally.
to pay money for something that you actually don't want to hear is a rare situation, but it does happen sometimes.
Does happen, exactly.
Yeah,
And so how
exactly.
do you tend to handle that? Do you catch up with it? You find yourself catching up to it a little sooner than you used to when it does happen? You're like, oh, like, you know what I
Yes,
mean?
yes.
Like,
Well,
here we
I mean,
go.
I notice it like basic on the spot, because you explain something and then the person will kind of have a certain reaction to what you say. No matter how good they're able to implement it, you can kind of tell whether they want to implement it or not.
Yeah.
Right?
Whether
So
they're fighting it or not, right?
exactly. So and at that point, I kind of break it down for them intellectually. I give them like a bird's eye perspective. I was like, okay, so this is what you're doing and this is what you're trying to do. And if you follow this path, then the most likely outcome out of my experience, which is the only thing I can, talk about, is this and this and this. This is what I've seen will happen if you do this. This is what I've seen will do this. And it's going to take you maybe this much longer to learn something, or maybe there's an injury now that's more likely to happen, and so forth. The reason why I would recommend you should focus on this and try to do this instead is because of this, this, and this. So it's not, I'm not trying to kind of teach them something that they should do because they, based on pure trust and belief in what I'm saying because of whoever they think I am or of my experience, but they should just, I try to get them to a point where they're open enough to try it out, and they become open to it because now just intellectually it starts to make sense. Even though there's some aversion towards doing it, they don't like it maybe so much, and they like much better doing something else. But now they understand, okay, there could be a benefit.
Gotcha.
Whether that is going to be a benefit or not, nobody really knows. And the only way to find out is to try it out and see for yourself. And
Yeah, and I can see how
so
that would be highly effective, Christian, with people that are sort of a little bit more, left brain, so to speak, a little more intellectual, a little more rational. But there are times when people, the resistance is very emotional. It could be something a little bit more deep rooted. How do you go and, how do you handle that dynamic?
yeah. Well, if somebody is resistant towards something on a more somatic level, let's say, right? They're not arguing with me, which really that never happens, because like their arguments are not based on logic and experience. Their arguments are based on just like a thought that they had because they saw something on TV or something. It's like, it's very, very easy to dismantle their logic. Even if somebody is really emotionally just at a point where they don't want to do it, it doesn't feel good, I still have the logical approach, because if somebody can get to a point where they reframe their perspective, it can kind of like loosen to a certain degree this strong aversion towards it. Right. So of course it doesn't go, but it's maybe not like such a strong belief anymore. There's like a light shimmer of like, because the understanding of it helps you to kind of release that. It's like, oh, maybe that's possible. That kind of doesn't sound like complete nonsense what you're talking about. And then when somebody has this aversion, and the emotionality kind of that comes in, right? They don't like it, or they get upset or frustrated by whatever they're doing. Then that is where kind of my practice comes in, where I try to allow what they're experiencing, which is unpleasant, for them. So I'm not making their aversion worse. It's like, no, you should not feel bad.
You're not fighting their aversion.
Exactly. No, I'm like, that's fine. Like, it's understandable. Totally understandable that like you don't feel like good like this. This is not working yet. So by being really equanimous with them, with their aversion, it kind of makes it a little bit easier for them to be equanimous with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right? So it sounds like you as a male have access to empathy, which not all males have a fair amount of access to, and that is part of what's making you a better coach. Is that accurate?
Yes, I would maybe even put it into the category of compassion, where if I would differentiate the two, where empathy I would kind of define as one's ability to feel what the other person is feeling, and compassion being that skill, and adding on top of that I wish something well for the other person.
Yes.
Doesn't even have to be something that I say or do, but it's just like, that's my intention behind it. So the compassion aspect, even though that's not something that I necessarily say in the lesson, but I am really wishing them well. I am trying to help them with it. I am, saying, this is okay that you feel like that. And now let's try this. Like, I know it's okay because I'm feeling that all day, every day also, I just don't have such a strong aversion towards it anymore.
I love it because intuitively, one of the next questions that's sort of popping in my skull here is just, what kinds of situations get you disappointed? Do you get other times when you get more attached to someone's success in some ways than they might? Are there situations where you do get disappointed?
That's, no, actually, it has not happened to me so far. My mentor kind of gave that on to me very early, and he said, you should never want success more than the athlete. So if I want them to be successful more than they want to be successful, there's like a complete disconnect. So I go on to the level of where they're at, however much they want right? What they want to achieve, how motivated they are, whatever their goals are. And then I kind of ride that, boat with them, so to speak.
I love it, Christian, because I'm smiling inside here and outside too, because, getting a doctorate in my 20s, I didn't have your mentor. So in my 20s and early 30s, I was constantly, more passionate, more motivated than many of my clients. I wanted more success than they were ready for, if that makes sense. Right?
Yes.
And so I had to learn that the hard way. It sounds like your mentor was able to teach you that while you were still young and saved you a fair amount of suffering.
A lot, yes. And of course that came through, especially early on. At some points, it's also not the easiest thing to distinguish between just being kind of not caring about what the athlete's success is, right?
Yeah.
And being okay with what they want. It's not like that easy to distinguish those two. It starts to be irrelevant. Like, yeah, you run, you don't run. Like, I don't care. Just do what you want. It's not that, right?
No, it's not
just
that at
like,
all. No.
You want to run? Great. I'm going to be there with you. And you're like, you don't really want to run. It's like, that's fine. I'm here to help you, to push you for sure, but not to a point where maybe in the 80s in Eastern Europe and Russia, they were kind of hitting them with the back of their hand if they wouldn't run the way they were supposed to run.
Yeah.
Like,
well, that would be contrary to the level of compassion that you're bringing, right?
Yes.
The next level from empathy to compassion, it wouldn't fit. It's very interesting. Is there any distinctions, in your opinion, from, the people that you've coached, and I'm just going to give it sort of an arbitrary, people in the top 20 in the world versus top 100 in the world versus top 500 or something. Break down some of those distinctions that you've seen that separates given similar sort of genetic ability, because my experience is you have to have the it as an athlete, and the it is, partially genetic, and then partially, there are other factors there, mental and emotional and spiritual, right? So, take me through that, your perspective there. Thanks for watching See It and Feel It with Dr. Brett, and stay tuned for part 2 of this interview. Remember to like, subscribe, and share with a friend.